Today,
Yeah, but you...
in our faithful citizen conversation, we will spend a little bit of we will spend our time talking about the ecology and environment and some of the responsibilities that we have in caring for the environment. And it's been a while since we started that particular aspect of this conversation, so I thought it might be helpful to review just briefly. One of the questions that we talked about the Sunday that we spent on this was, why should we be concerned about the environment? There are folks in our day who make an increasingly good case for the role that climate change plays with the environment and how we can do something about climate change. Then there are folks that dismiss that. For us, whether or not we are someone who believes that there is climate change that we can do something about, for us, the answer is always, first and foremost, because this is God's world, and we are given to care for God's world. In Genesis 1:26, human beings made in God's image are given the responsibility of exercising dominion. And I know we talked about, I can hear myself saying this, when we study this in a Bible study, whether it's with adults on a Tuesday or with our kids in confirmation or when we go to Gustavus Adolphus College, we are careful to distinguish between dominion and domination. Much of our countries and much of our world's attitude toward the environment is that it is ours to dominate. It is not ours to dominate. It is God's world in which we are called to exercise dominion. And that dominion is to be exercised in ways that reflect, because that's what an image does. An image reflects its source. We are to care for God's world in ways that reflect God's own care for the world. God so loved the world, and we are to also. That doesn't mean that we are not to use any of the natural resources, or that we can't have some kind of effect on the environment, but are there ways to do that that reflect an understanding of stewardship? Because that's a synonym for exercising dominion. A steward is somebody who cares for something that belongs to somebody else. So that's where the conversation about the environment begins for us, because we know we're God's people, and we know that this world is God's. Then we talked about the fact that ecology, let me make sure I get this right. Ecology is from the Greek word oikos, which means house. Ecology is a word about the house that we live in, this world that we live in. And economics is from the same root. You say root or root?
Doesn't matter. Root.
I guess not.
You're from Osakis, you say root. R-U-T.
The nomos means law, and the law by which our household or our world is governed, or the laws by which our world or household is governed. And then we ended last time by talking about whether or not there should be a connection between ecology and economics, and if so, what that connection is or might be. Thoughts about any of that?
Well, it does go in all forms of our life. Like, say for example, hunters, you know, they come to a point where they gotta back off and go quotas, and it goes with everything. Goes with your farmers, goes right down the line. So yeah, there's a connection there.
Mm-hmm.
Is that economics sometimes, I think of it financially.
Sure.
So this does not, law of the house, but that doesn't always fit in my mind with the other definitions.
Well, it's how do we live together and conduct our business
Okay.
in God's world. There's a fellow by the name of Diamond who's written a number of landmark sort of books about sociology and anthropology and the environment. And one of the questions he writes about cultures that have been born, it's sort of like today's gospel text, been born, grown, G-R-O-W-N, and then declined. Why? Because there was a drought, or in one of his chapters he writes about an island, a real life thing, an island where the coconut is everything. And what was the guy thinking who cut down the last coconut tree? Sort of an interesting, what were you thinking about in terms of limits, or whatever? Michelle?
Excuse me, is there someone else?
Oh, go ahead.
I really appreciate your breaking the words down like that for me, because I'm sort of hopeful that we are moving, our conversation is moving, as a society, is moving away from if there's climate change to there is climate change. And I think the conversation has shifted to how much do we as humans impact that.
Sure.
And I tell you, the challenge for me is I can get so adamant about this that I forget to look for ways that we might be moving in positive directions to support that. In other words, my government involved, and I would say, well, you didn't support climate change or climate legislation or something like that. And I think that's something that I need to be aware of as a Christian. How do I need to shift my perspective to make room for all of the people in the house, so that the laws of the land, because it's not going to happen overnight, so that laws of the land can shift wherever they can shift to help us with where we live. So that's what I struggle with individually.
I appreciate that. One of the things connected with that we talked about briefly last time was, so who bears the loss if you're a coal miner out of work because we're preferring natural gas?
Yep.
Right? Or, what's the name of the book that I'm reading?
The fifth risk. Is that one?
The fifth what?
Risk.
Risk?
Yeah.
The fifth risk is by Michael Lewis.
Oh, he's good.
Michael Lewis is a great writer. He's the author of The Blind Side and Moneyball, and he's written about Wall Street. And he can write. I was telling Borders the other day, one of the endorsements on the inside jacket of this book is, this guy could write a book on the history of the stapler, and I would read it. He can write. One of the best writers. And the fifth risk is about some of the things in which our federal government is involved. And there's a big chapter on the environment and the EPA and all of that. It is well worth your time to check it out. And that, I think, helps my thinking with some of what you're talking about, Michelle.
And Bob, what you just said about the coal miners, I think that's a very important perspective. And I look at the twins I look at the little ones. They're the other ones that are gonna bear the brunt.
Sure.
It's our future too. I mean, it's the people right now who don't have jobs, don't have health insurance in these economies, and our children coming along, those who come after us.
I think of, coming from the farming thing, what we used to do to the land, and how much pesticide and insecticide and stuff.
Yep.
Not only did it ruin the land, but that's how my brother got Parkinson's, because of the insecticide. And so we're not only ruining the land and the people, the animals who live on it,
And the people working
and
in
the
the
people
fields.
work on it. So, I mean, if we have coal miners, how are we protecting their health from black lung?
Sure.
I mean, every occupation seems to have a downside with that, something happening in the environment.
Coal mining is number one in risk to human health.
Oh, yeah.
Farming is number two.
Wow.
Mhm.
Well, and it seems like so you and I, you know, we can make individual changes where we, you know, try to support farmers that use the land responsibly, and, you know, we try to, you know, use energy responsibly. I'm sorry that I'm not sorry that I keep coming back to it, because I think it really is important, but it seems like we have so little power to change it. The people who are in power to change it are legislators and the rich. And how do we get them to change their minds, change their hearts, and say, you want to take care of these people, because we are all in this together. And you're not. You care about being in charge, and you care about getting more money. I said child.
No,
Okay.
I got it.
I got it.
Well, it wasn't.
Scott?
I wanted to say something when Ken was here the other week, but, you know, how can we change things? Well, you have to vote in people to change it. Well, I watched Michael Moore on one of the late shows weeks back, and it was prior to the election, and he said, what is the biggest political group in the country? And I'm like, well, I don't know. He said it's the non-voter. Because there's more non-voters than there are people that are Democrats or independents or, so if everyone got out and voted and cared, it'd be completely different. And I think you could pass laws that would help the environment or those kind of people, but everyone has to get out and
And too, you know, we run into this deal about workers, economy. Like, for example, right now, they're trying to get railroads to build through a certain area, and they don't want to bring that because they're bringing iron ore or something through the area. Well, it kind of puts labor in a tough spot, because they got a lot of workers there, but then you got other laborers that are getting hurt by it, so it's a problem.
Right.
Well, to go off of labor with coal mining and compare it to food, talking about number one, number two, I don't have an alternative for agriculture. I need food. So I can't find a better way to do that. I do have an alternative to coal. I have several alternatives. And yes, there are coal workers who would have to find another job. Well, I've had to find other jobs. My parents had to find other jobs. That happens. And this idea that we do not touch a certain segment of the economy because those jobs are more important than the environment or these other jobs or whatever. I understand you're talking about entire regions. We're talking about West Virginia compared to here, or West Virginia compared to Pacific Northwest.
Or central North Dakota.
Or definitely, I mean, that's coal too. Among other things.
Vouch for that. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
the idea that jobs are the number one thing that must be preserved. Yes, jobs need to be preserved, but jobs come in many different forms. Food does not. Heat comes in many different forms. Having those conversations, having those questions, rather than it'll cost jobs and we can't do it, That just stops the conversation.
Back to Michelle's comment about having a conversation about that, because there are so many different ways to look at it. Carolyn?
Off of both of those, we're talking about people in power and people with money to go into those regions and offer an alternative. And that really would take a mediator of, opportunity. I mean, in some of those regions, just to support their family, there's more of an openness to opportunities, but then you have people who, for generations, this has been their, that's their whole,
Heritage.
thank you, heritage.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that some of these people who have the money to do that aren't concerned about, that doesn't reflect their concern.
Mm-hmm.
And, how do you help facilitate that?
And who do you vote for? Some of us would look to government to do some of that,
Yeah,
and others look not to do government.
And that's one of the things that Lewis gets into in the fifth risk. What is the role of government when it comes to redistributing resources or directing resources, natural or human, to this industry or that? What's on the decline? What's on the rise? When we talk about West Virginia, thank Harry Byrd for some of the industry that's there, because every time he had a chance, there was a new government building being built in West Virginia. Jim?
I read a story one time, and I'm not going to go to the story, but the moral of the story was there are three types of love in this world: sacred, profane, and self. And of the three, the latter is the truest and the strongest. And I've always thought, that's going to hit her right on the head.
Yeah.
If it goes against your interest, you are not going to be in favor of it.
Mm-hmm.
In the
speak to that.
farmers, in the agricultural area, they have a big question about, are they feeding the United States or the world?
Yeah.
And that really is, I've been on the outside looking in for quite a while and trying to figure out what the issues are.
Well, it depends on what they grow. If
Well,
the
they
nation
grow
needs only so
these
much
things.
and they're producing X much more,
Because
They
they
grow
have an
based
incentive.
on-
because they have an incentive.
They grow based on a global need. So,
Or an incentive of
or
some sort.
yeah, or subsidies. When they subsidies, they're gonna grow that. So the government can make things worse that way.
Absolutely.
And
In
it's really
1981,
complex.
It is.
1981, I was working on a farm near Carpio, North Dakota, and it was the day that Jimmy Carter announced the Russian grain embargo. And the guy that I was working for, Cliff, was expert grain marketer. We were sitting at the kitchen table, and he looked at me, he says, "There goes farming." Because all of the wheat coming out of North Dakota was going to Russia.
So,
Oh, yeah, the huge issue
Yeah.
with trade.
So one of the things that distinguishes this Faithful Citizen course from anything else that I've seen related to this is how it looks at what it means that this is God's world, and that we have a role to play not only for each other in this country, but that we have a role to play as world citizens as well, so that it is appropriate to ask, are we feeding our people, or are we feeding God's people? And again, when an industry, when a plant moves to another part of the world and the standard of living goes up in that part of the world, there are consequences, because now more people can buy a car that will, exhaust into the atmosphere. But if the standard of living in a town in Mexico goes up, is that something for which we might be thankful because this is God's world? Or, Jim, is it It's easy for us to say because it wasn't our job, you know, but this sense that it is not, a person cannot biblically make the case of being a strict nationalist or America first, period. It just can't.
I know one of
Biblically.
my little farmer friends,
Uh-huh.
she's in college now, but we were at farmer's market together, and she had a book with her and they're teaching, they're discussing issues of outsourcing things, you know, to help an economy somewhere across the ocean, where, you know, they're discussing these things in college, you know, those ethical things, which I was really pleased with,
Yeah.
because my son always said, you know, when we outsource computers work, those poor people over there don't have anything to do. You know, they have no jobs, so you're really, you know, really helping a lot of people when you can outsource, so.
Carolyn?
So then that's perspective again as to, are those companies doing it because they care about God's world and want to build opportunities?
No.
Are they doing that simply because it costs less? Are they accepting those places because of the tax breaks they get?
Yeah, for sure. Profit oriented.
And just,
But the fallout from that is usually a lot of, you know, raising the.
Luther says that God is not concerned with our reasons why we do something when it comes to helping our neighbor. What God is concerned with is that our neighbor is helped. So that whether it's because you and I know that God loves us that we help our neighbor, that's great. But if our neighbor is helped because the law says you have to pay taxes and so do I, and those taxes will be used to help our neighbor, that's fine with God too. That to wait for pure motives is a mistake. Justin?
It makes me think of when you use the term neighbor, one of the questions Jesus was asked directly is, and who is my neighbor? And when people read that portion, it's usually in awe, or someone being challenging. I read that as being sarcastic, and not a whole lot of people read a lot of sarcasm in the Bible, but I do. When I see that Pharisee asking Jesus, and who's my neighbor, scoffing. But it is one of the few times that Jesus asked a direct question, and the answer is the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Right.
Helping people you have absolutely no interest, and it only hurts you to help. So, I mean, if you use the term neighbor, that gets sticky.
So, I'd like for us to watch two halves of the DVD on the environment. So Scott, if you want to do, we'll look at 3A. The guy that we're going to see is a director of a camp. So this is 1A. So somehow if you fast forward through this, we'll get to the table of contents, or maybe you can know it different way.
Very different from very culture shock coming back to this country because all of a sudden it's no
There we go. We want a 3A. Good. We're probably going to need more volume, right?
yes, please.
Camp Fowler is a Christian camp that's been here for 57 years, primarily to take kids and adults and to spend a week in the wilderness, to spend a week together learning about God, but also learning a lot about ourselves and about our interrelationships with each other and our interrelationships with the land. Right now, there are kids out in this lake who are canoeing, and canoeing is a communal sport. Because if the person in the front doesn't talk to the person in the back, and if they're not working together, they're not going to make it across that beautiful lake. So that's an important value for us. The second value for us is the value of simplicity. Our kids live in a wired world, or a wireless world, I guess. Where they're always on, they're always online, they're always clicking their cell phones, they're always checking their Facebook status. This is a very complicated world, a very noisy world. And here, those things aren't allowed. We make space, not to say that they're evil or bad, but they still belong in this space. All of the outdoor furniture, the Adirondack chairs around camp that are on our porches were all made by campers. And these are junior and senior high kids, and many of whom have never built a thing in their lives. And they spend 6 hours together working to build a chair. And then one of them will take that chair home at the end of the week. So the challenge is, how do you take those values home? How do you take that value of simplicity home? How do you take that value of community home? How do you take that value of caring for the world home that you live here? And I mean, a lot of that we can't control. A lot of that does dissipate when they leave here, but we give them a glimpse of a different reality. And once you had a glimpse of a different way of living, you can't not see that anymore. That's something that gets embedded in you and begins to grow in your spirit. And I've had the advantage of watching a lot of these kids grow. And you know, for a lot of them, it doesn't do any good. It doesn't make any difference. But for enough of them, it does. It changes their life. And if it doesn't change their life, it becomes one more pebble on that side of the scale that does change their lives. Because what we need are places like this, and we need an energetic science teacher in school who teaches them something, and you need a good coach or a good piano teacher who shows you the joy of music or what sports are really about. And you need a parent or an aunt or an uncle who can live into those values, and somehow all those things weave together into the tapestry of a child growing up, and they can find out that life is more than having the best clothes or knowing what's on the latest movie or having the most friends, on your account. That life is way richer than that. That's the sort of life that gives me true life and allows me to participate in that greater story that's going on around me, that I can, if I listen just right, sometimes I can hear in the leaves with the wind blowing off this lake, or you can catch in the scent in the forest, or that you can you just feel within you.
Thoughts? Reactions? I want to get to the 3B, Scott, before
we talk a lot, so Justin and I are both part of this parenting group online, and we talk a lot in this group about how our kids have too much stuff. How do we get rid of the stuff? And this is something I think that both of us have been mulling over for a while, is how do we make our kids' lives more simple? And I think it does tie back to ecology, because when we think about, if we're looking for simplicity, I think for us right now that means not buying as many clothes for the twins, not buying as many toys. When we do buy, we buy used, or we try to, partly because it's affordable and partly because it's more sustainable, yeah. And so I think a lot of, it seems to me that I hear a lot of my friends who are parents our age also talking about this desire to return to simplicity, less scheduling, less toys, or fewer toys, fewer activities, just, you know, not hunkering down with your family, but just focusing on the things that truly make us happy as a family. And I know, you know, for us, it's Saturday mornings just sitting around and doing nothing. And we play and that's it. And it's not complicated. And it's not spending any money, and it's really lovely. But we also have the luxury of doing that as a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday family. We have our weekends.
Well, the dinner time is
Yes.
one of the very important things about family, eat together.
Dinner time's a bunch of wrestling right now, but.
Well, we all wrestle together, so.
Yeah.
Now you're gonna eat that.
Not
Now
always
you're gonna eat that.
possible.
But it's still, eat that.
So we'll talk a little bit more about that after we watch 3B. Anything else before we?
Just a quick
Michelle?
comment. He talked about how do you give people a glimpse? How do you give the children a glimpse of this? And I would start hearken to your comment about, you know, those in power and those with wealth, sometimes the same. How do you give people a glimpse of a different world? I don't know. That's a question.
Well, I think that in my experience here, one of the most important things that we have done to help our young people get a glimpse is to send them on servant trips every other or every third year. And for us as a congregation to support those trips is really an important thing. And I think that they are more likely to, if it doesn't bear immediate results, more likely to bear results longer term than a lot of the other things that we do.
They never forget those trips.
Yeah.
Never.
The other thing that occurs to me about our young people, the man who founded Feed My Starving Children just died. And that sort of activity really can make a difference.
And even more than that, for them to go to a homeless shelter and help serve. It really, it doesn't knock them down their pegs, but really opens their eyes and gives them a glimpse.
And it shows how important that experience is versus tell someone. You can't change someone's mind, they have to change their own mind. And that comes through living those experiences.
It occurs to me, befriend, because you get some of the kids to go on these trips, to have these experiences, because either they're family members or they've been befriended by someone. So how do we befriend people who do have that power and encourage these glimpses?
I heard a news comment this morning about a school in England that was banning the big expensive jackets that cost over $200 or something like that, because it sets apart, these people have the money and I don't, and so what's fair, what's good? I mean, they were trying this, and the parents brought this up. They said, we don't want our kids telling everybody else we're so rich and you're not, and I have more than you have. And our society's become that way. I'm in more activities, I can do all these things, at what cost? The families do not sit down for supper and visit anymore. Most of them, I should say, in my estimation.
And it's hard, it's an arms race.
Everything
is an arms race right now. Like if Selena's a dance and piano, and that is enough. But then you think, well, okay, if she's not in this, you know, is that going to lead to this later, and then she's not going to get into Harvard, and oh my God, like, and I realize that that's very hyperbolic, but that anxiety is there. That am I doing everything for my kid to give them a leg up?
Well, and she's not allowed in Harvard, but.
And what would she?
She's
Not allowed in Harvard.
Thanks for that,
There's
Justin.
no way she will. Not on my watch.
Forget about Yale, forget it.
Darren, were you gonna say something?
It's all the schools.
In regard to the jacket issue,
She has to.
it's not
She got married.
just it's families who can't really afford that, the pressure from their child saying, that's, you know, that's what's important to me. So it's not just like, it also can affect the economics of the family. Sure. Because, stretching, you know, what the focus is. The other thing when we talk about the difference one person can make, some of the biggest things that I've exposed myself to is, if you've seen the Fred Rogers documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor? They show him in front of a bunch of lawmakers who are saying, why do we need PBS TV? We have all these other networks. And that he gets up and he's the one who really sways their thinking about what public TV can do that the other networks can do. And the other thing is, if you have Netflix, there's a new show called Patriot Act, and it's by Hassan, I don't know his last name. Minaj, thank you. And the most recent episode, a new one comes out every Sunday, but the most recent episode that I saw was about oil, which was very interesting and talks about the economics and the global warming. And the other one that I think is very interesting and is about Amazon. And when you think about the economics, I have one of my parents who is like huge Amazon fan because they can get things there the cheapest. But if they understand the business model of Amazon, maybe that wouldn't be the most important thing. You know? Yeah.
Yeah, that's going on right now with those new Amazon locations opening up, and the discussion has been why they chose those cities, and then the mayors or governors of those cities or those places are giving away the farm to get them in there, and then they demonize them once they're there.
Well, do they offer a livable wage to their employees?
Right.
Yeah.
And they do. So they're employing all these people, so it's not easy.
But are they employing those people with a livable wage? Does that, like, they bring jobs for working for them?
I don't know, but I think they are.
They could do better.
Yeah.
And part-time versus full-time work, a lot of it.
Oh, yeah. I think some people want part-time.
Let's watch 3B, and then you let me know if we want to continue this conversation next Sunday or start on a different part of Faithful Citizen. Go ahead, Scott, please.
When it comes to justice in relation to our material world,
Can you turn it up a little bit?
most of us are
please?
finding that these days that we must expand our understanding of economics to include the so-called natural world, because that world is the world that we depend on every day for our existence. Doing justice to non-humans is one of those new agendas for us. Thomas Friedman, in a column in the New York Times recently, said, we are now, as a world civilization, up against a wall. We are hitting the wall, which is a limitation on our ability to manage our affairs on the basis of more and more and more and more. We must find a way to do less and less and less. And we must find a way both to respect each other enough so that we don't exploit each other, so that some of us get rich while the other of us get poor. But that same rule applies to our environment. If we don't support that environment and its health, so to speak, we destroy ourselves. And I guess I'd like to ask you, how do we ever get into a fix in which we are in danger of fouling our own nest and indeed creating an economy which is not supported very long? How do we get this way?
Well, I mean, you have to go into a deep history here. Most people have been very poor. Most societies in historical times have been divided into a tiny group of very rich people, 5%, 2%, and 80 or 90% of the people who are really on the borderline of starvation. So poverty has been the norm. And nobody who's that poor wants to stay that way. And they've always had fantasies about kings and queens and princes who had everything they wanted. And because they would like to have that too. In all traditional societies, you have folk tales about kings and so on. And we have created a society which, though far from egalitarian, equality has not been fulfilled as a central concern, nonetheless has raised the level of the poorest people more than most societies in history. Poverty is still present among us, and some of it is very grinding and very unjust. And at this point, I think we have to, and so my point is that the notion that if everybody gets more, if everybody can share in the wealth that traditional societies have had only for the aristocracy, that's a good thing. And can either of us say that's not a good thing? To pull people out of being on the verge of starvation is certainly a good thing.
The Bible does not celebrate poverty, does it?
No, and that's the other thing. No. The Bible does not celebrate unjust poverty, but the Bible does celebrate another kind of poverty. Blessed are the poor, because they are closer to God. They do not worship mammon, but they're having mammon to worship. And and then in the monastic orders, the vow of poverty is part of what makes them leading a sacred, holy life. And this is true in other religions as well, certainly in Buddhism. So there is a good form of poverty, not grinding poverty and starvation, but a sense of limit, a sense that when we have what we need, we don't need more and more and more. And what I think Freeman is pointing to is that if we raise the standard of living of the whole world, of say, in the immediate future, China and India, in the longer run future, the Middle East and Africa and so on, we would have a use of resources that would destroy the environment completely, and we would not have any life at all. We would, fouling our nest is almost too gentle a metaphor for what would happen. So we are now at the situation where, we used to talk in the 60s and so on about voluntary poverty. Voluntary poverty is still on the agenda. Being careful about the resources we use, reducing those needs that we think are needs but maybe we don't really need. If we are to share this planet with all human beings on it, and not just Americans living well while most of the world is starving, we all have to share together in some limitation on sheer material acquisitions.
There are two words that increasingly occur in lots of the discussions these days about economics and our so-called prosperity. One is simplicity, the other is sufficiency.
Yes.
Is it possible that if we live more simply and with just sufficiency rather than maximum wealth, we would in fact be happier?
Yes. Well, certainly we do know that while grinding poverty is a source of unhappiness, that if basic needs are met, beyond that, the more money you have doesn't make you happier. Money makes you happy if you're very poor.
And that's not just ethically mandatory. The research shows
social psychology finds this.
Right.
So that, but then we run up against the question of what is a sufficiency. Standards of the society have changed. Teenagers think they have to have their own cars. They have to have fancy audio systems. They have to have God knows what, compared to the days when you and I were growing up. And they think that's necessary for sufficiency. So we need to really think deeply what we really need, and whether a lot of the things that we now assume we really need.
I think about some of us have grandparents and parents too, who grew up in a pretty poor circumstance, but never thought of themselves as poor.
Yes.
Because they had enough to eat.
Yes. Right.
and otherwise, have a happy life.
Yes.
We mustn't celebrate poverty, as I've said, but neither should we celebrate wealth the way a mammon worshiper does.
Yes, I know, because there isn't enough
Right.
there to, you know, for everyone to have that kind of, to keep wealth.
So, our time is up. Would you prefer, chapter 4 is on global security. Would you rather move on to that next week, or would you rather start next week by watching this one more time and then moving through conversation a little bit more about ecology, environment, economy? What's your preference?
What's the, program for the Christmas program?
No, I'm not talking about that.
I know.
I don't know.
Have you volunteered to be part of the
Yeah.
intergenerational cast?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know if my opinion matters.
If you're not gonna be,
If you're in that, you can't be in here, right?
right, that's true, yes.
Okay.
I mean, that's important.
Can't serve two masters.
But you can watch this on tape.
Uh-huh. You mean on the website?
Yep.
Good point.
That's true. Yay.
Who's gonna be here next week, and what thoughts do you have? Mark?
I don't have thoughts, I kinda like what we were talking about raising the kids.
Yeah, that's important right now.
Well, I can
So
use
that
all the
would,
help that you guys have.
but so that would mean,
I
we'll
know.
take a look at this again, because they're talking about simplicity and sufficiency. I found that a very helpful thought. And then, I mean, I'll be prepared if we want to move on to chapter 4, but we'll start with this. Is that a consensus? Okay. I will, how many of you have a book at home? This is chapter 4 for you with the book at home.
Thank you.
So, Carol, you do.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah. Anybody else need chapter 4? Scott, you do. Linda, you can see what you're missing.
Okay. She's fine.
All right, so next time, we will start with 3B that we just saw, and then we'll talk about simplicity and sufficiency, or wherever else the Spirit leads us. And I want to say one thing about hopefulness. There is a lot for us to think about today, and it would be very easy to not be hopeful. And one of the things that I've appreciated about this book that I'm reading is that it is about some of the things that I had no idea that we as a people are invested in. I mean, it's unbelievable, some of the things that our government employees are involved in, because they're excited about it. We have government employees here, and I know they're excited about things that they're involved in. And I was raised by a government employee who was very committed to what he was involved in, and I have two brothers, one who was and one who is a government employees. And our neighbors were government employees when I was growing up, and they are good people. I mean, the vast majority. But it is easy to lose hope. And I don't remember if it was, I doubt if it was in this book, but within the last week, I read about the story in the Old Testament where Elijah has been called by God to be his spokesperson, and Elijah feels all alone. And he's ready to quit. And if God doesn't relieve him of his responsibility, Elijah will end it himself. And what does God say to Elijah? He says, there's a remnant of 7,000 that you have no idea about, and they're doing the same work you are. So get up and go to work. You know, that's important for us to remember. You know, that the kingdom comes without our praying for it and without our recognizing it. Why? Because God is committed to God's world, and that doesn't stop. Okay? So, next time we'll pick it up with
Oh,
3B.
wait a minute.
Go from there.
The deeds of love and mercy, the heavenly kingdom.
Yes, I thought about that, yes. Man, I'm thinking, the whole time I'm working on that sermon, I'm thinking, we were gone the wrong Sunday, I should have left this for Amy to preach, you know? But, and we picked that hymn months ago. But wasn't that just the way it should have ended? Yeah.